Overthinking in old age? These 5 mental shifts will bring you peace. Overthinking is like a pesky roommate that never pays rent but always sticks around, especially as we age. It starts with a harmless thought and then spirals into endless what-ifs, regrets, and hypotheticals. You know what I'm talking about, right? Those late-night mental marathons where you replay conversations from decades ago or worry about something as small as whether you should have planted roses instead of tulips. It's like your mind is stuck on a treadmill with no off button. Let me tell you, you're not alone in this. Studies show that overthinking is incredibly common in older adults, and while it might feel like a personal quirk, it's often tied to real psychological patterns. Think about it. Life slows down as we get older. There's more time to think and fewer distractions. This can open the door to ruminating about things we can't control or change. A recent study published in the Journal of Aging and Mental Health found that older adults who tend to overthink report higher levels of anxiety and stress compared to those who don't. It's not just an annoyance. It can take a toll on your mental health and even your physical well-being. But here's the good news. You don't have to stay stuck in this cycle forever. There are some powerful mental shifts that can help you step off that exhausting treadmill and find a little more peace. Let's start with the idea of acceptance. It sounds so simple on paper, doesn't it? But in reality, boy, is it tricky to put into practice. When you're stuck in the loop of overthinking, it's often because you're resisting something. Maybe it's a mistake you made 20 years ago that you can't seem to shake off. Or perhaps you're preoccupied with a what-if about tomorrow that feels like a storm cloud hovering over your peace of mind. Here's the thing, though. You can't go back and change the past. It's like trying to put toothpaste back into the tube. And unless you've got a crystal ball hidden in your closet, you can't predict the future either. So why let these thoughts live rent-free in your head and rob you of your peace? This is where acceptance comes in, and it's not about throwing in the towel or giving up. It's about acknowledging reality without the added drama. A fascinating case study from the University of California really brought this home. In their research, participants who practiced acceptance experienced a nearly 40% reduction in overthinking. Now, that is not just fluff. It's science. These participants didn't try to fight their thoughts or push them away. Instead, they simply acknowledged them like you might notice a bird flying past your window. They didn't grab onto the bird. They didn't try to shoo it away. They just let it be. And over time, those thoughts began to lose their grip. Let me share a little story to bring this idea to life. There was a man named George in the study. He was in his late 60s and couldn't stop replaying a business decision he made decades ago that didn't pan out. Every time he thought about it, he'd feel a wave of regret and start beating himself up mentally. But after practicing acceptance for a few weeks, something amazing happened. Instead of spiraling into regret, George began to notice his thoughts, acknowledge them without judgment, and move on. He described it as lifting a weight off his shoulders that he didn't even realize he had been carrying for years. That's the power of acceptance. It's not magic, but it can feel like it when you finally let go of the mental tug-of-war and make space for peace. Next, let's talk about reframing. Imagine it as swapping out your old, blurry glasses for a shiny new pair that sharpens your view of the world. Reframing is a mental shift that lets you see situations from a fresh perspective. Instead of dwelling on why did this happen to me, you get curious and ask, what can I learn from this, or how could this help me grow? It's not about ignoring the hard stuff or pretending everything is sunshine and rainbows. It's about finding meaning in life's challenges rather than letting them weigh you down. Take Helen, for example. She's a 72-year-old woman who became a key figure in a psychological study on cognitive reframing. For years, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the friendships she had lost over time. She would constantly replay moments in her head, blaming herself for drifting apart from people she cared about deeply. Why didn't I call more often, she'd ask. Did I say something wrong? These thoughts became an endless loop of guilt and regret that chipped away at her happiness. When Helen was introduced to reframing, her world slowly began to change. Instead of viewing those friendships as failures, she started to see them as beautiful chapters of her life. She thought about the laughter, the memories, and the ways those friends had enriched her journey, even if they weren't in her life anymore. Not every story needs a sequel, she told herself one day, smiling at the thought. By shifting her perspective, Helen began to feel grateful instead of guilty. It was as if she had been holding onto an old suitcase full of regrets, and reframing gave her permission to set it down and walk away. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology supports Helen's experience. Participants who practiced reframing techniques reported significantly lower levels of anxiety and overthinking after just 8 weeks. It's powerful stuff. One participant even described it as flipping a mental switch, allowing them to see challenges as opportunities instead of obstacles. When you think about it, reframing is like teaching your mind a new language. Instead of speaking in what went wrong, it starts thinking in what can I do with this? It's a subtle shift, but one that can transform how you navigate life. Now let's dive into something that might surprise you. The power of focus. Overthinking thrives when your mind is left with too much empty space, like an unfurnished room where every little sound echoes endlessly. The same happens with your thoughts. If your mental space is wide open and unoccupied, those pesky thoughts bounce around uncontrollably, growing louder and more intense with every pass. But here's the good news, you can take control of that space by filling it with meaningful activities. And no, you don't need to go bungee jumping or suddenly become a chess grandmaster to see results. Let me share the story of Martin, a 70-year-old retired school teacher who found himself struggling with overthinking after his wife passed away. He had a lot of time on his hands and a lot of unprocessed thoughts swirling around. He would sit for hours replaying old conversations, wondering if he could have done things differently, and stressing about how he would spend the rest of his life alone. His daughter suggested he try volunteering at a local library, a place he had always loved but hadn't visited in years. At first, he was hesitant. What difference could shelving books and helping kids with homework make? Well, it made all the difference. The simple act of focusing on something outside of himself gave Martin a new sense of purpose. Instead of replaying old memories, he found himself absorbed in helping others and learning new skills. He even started a book club for senior citizens. What's fascinating is that within a few weeks, Martin noticed his overthinking had dramatically decreased. It wasn't that the thoughts disappeared entirely, but they no longer consumed him. The mental space that was once filled with doubts and worries was now occupied by plans, tasks, and meaningful interactions. This isn't just anecdotal. A report from the National Institute on Aging revealed some eye-opening data. Older adults who regularly engaged in hobbies or community activities reported significantly lower levels of rumination and overthinking. The key takeaway here is that purposeful activity acts like a sponge for those intrusive thoughts. When your brain is focused on something productive or enjoyable, it simply doesn't have the bandwidth to overthink every little detail. It's almost like tricking your brain into forgetting to worry. And it doesn't have to be anything grand or life-changing. Small tasks can make a huge impact. Take gardening, for example. Digging in the dirt, planting seeds, and watching them grow isn't just about creating a beautiful garden. It's about being present and engaged in a process that requires your attention. It's nearly impossible to overthink when you're trying to remember if you've watered the roses or pulled out all the weeds. Or consider solving crossword puzzles. That little burst of satisfaction when you finally figure out a tricky clue is enough to make your mind feel sharp and focused, pushing out those lingering doubts and worries. Even mundane tasks like organizing a closet or baking cookies can become opportunities to direct your focus. Have you ever lost yourself in a recipe, meticulously measuring out each ingredient and timing everything just right? That's the magic of focus in action. You're not just making cookies. You're giving your mind a much-needed break from itself, allowing it to reset and recharge. Another remarkable example comes from a group of older adults who participated in a community art project. Many of them reported that their overthinking decreased dramatically after just a few sessions of painting and drawing. They weren't professional artists by any stretch, but the act of creating something with their hands shifted their attention away from their worries and toward the canvas. One participant said, "For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in the moment instead of being stuck in my head." So, why not give this a try? Think of something that interests you, even if it's just a tiny spark of curiosity. Maybe it's birdwatching, knitting, playing cards with friends, or joining a walking group. These activities might seem small, but they carry a big punch when it comes to quieting an overactive mind. The beauty of focus is that it doesn't demand perfection or expertise. All it asks is for you to show up and engage. Before you know it, you'll realize that the thoughts that once loomed large in your mind have taken a back seat. Instead, your brain will be busy enjoying the task at hand, leaving little room for overthinking. Another game-changing mental shift is gratitude. I know. You've probably heard this advice before and maybe even rolled your eyes thinking, "Sure, just be grateful and all my problems will magically disappear." But hear me out, because this one is seriously worth a closer look. The magic of gratitude isn't just in saying thanks or writing a few bullet points in a journal. It's about rewiring your brain to focus on what's good in your life, even when things feel heavy. And guess what? Science backs this up. A long-term study from Harvard University found that individuals who kept a daily gratitude journal not only felt better overall, but also showed significant reductions in overthinking and anxiety. The reason is fascinating and super simple. Your brain can't handle two conflicting emotions at once. Think of it as trying to pat your head and rub your belly at the same time. Sure, you might manage for a few seconds, but eventually, one action takes over. When you focus on gratitude, your brain has less room for worry, fear, or those endless what-if scenarios. Let me tell you about Rob, a retired teacher in his 70s who found himself spiraling into overthinking after he moved to a new town to be closer to his grandchildren. He missed his old routines, his familiar coffee shop, and even the nosy neighbor who always borrowed sugar. Instead of settling into his new life, Rob found himself ruminating on everything he had left behind. One day, his daughter suggested he try keeping a gratitude journal. At first, Rob scoffed. "What am I supposed to write? Grateful the sun rose again?" But he gave it a shot. To his surprise, writing just 3 things he was thankful for each day began to shift his perspective. On day 1, he wrote about the smell of fresh coffee. On day 3, he jotted down how his grandson ran to greet him after school. Within a few weeks, Rob noticed something remarkable. His mind wasn't constantly spinning with what-if thoughts about his old life. Instead, he found himself savoring small, joyful moments. And those moments added up. Gratitude became his secret weapon, crowding out the overthinking that had been draining his peace of mind. This simple practice might seem small, but the impact can be monumental. Finally, let's touch on mindfulness. Now, before you roll your eyes and picture yourself sitting cross-legged on a cushion, chanting something mystical, let me set the record straight. Mindfulness doesn't require incense or a guru. It's really just about being fully present in the moment. Overthinking often yanks us into the past with all its regrets or catapults us into the future with endless worries. Mindfulness is like a friendly nudge that says, "Hey, come back to right now. This moment is all you've got." Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite chair, but instead of enjoying the moment, your mind is spiraling. You're replaying that awkward conversation from last week or stressing over a doctor's appointment next month. Sound familiar? That's overthinking in action, dragging you away from the present. Mindfulness invites you to pause, take a breath, and notice what's happening around you right now. What can you see? What can you hear? Is there a bird chirping outside? Can you feel the fabric of the chair beneath you? These might seem like small, almost trivial details, but focusing on them can work wonders for pulling you out of your mental tug-of-war. A fascinating study published in a psychology journal put mindfulness to the test. Participants who practiced mindfulness for just 10 minutes a day experienced a 50% decrease in overthinking after 6 weeks. Yes, you read that right, just 10 minutes a day. That's less time than it takes to brew a pot of coffee. One participant even shared how they used mindfulness to manage their tendency to replay embarrassing moments. Instead of letting those moments spiral out of control, they focused on their breathing or the feeling of their feet on the ground. Over time, those thoughts stopped having such a strong grip. Let me introduce you to Susan, a retired librarian in her late 60s who had always been a bit of a what-if person. She worried about everything, from whether she locked the door to how her granddaughter was doing at college. Susan decided to try mindfulness after her therapist suggested it might help with her constant worrying. She was skeptical but figured, why not? I've got 10 minutes. She started small by simply focusing on her morning cup of tea. Instead of letting her mind wander to her to-do list, she paid attention to the warmth of the mug in her hands and the aroma of the tea. The results were almost immediate. Within a week, Susan noticed she wasn't dwelling as much on the things she couldn't control. Her mind felt clearer, and she found herself enjoying little moments she used to overlook, like the sound of leaves rustling outside her window. By the end of 6 weeks, mindfulness had become a part of her routine. It wasn't a cure-all, but it gave her a tool to quiet the noise in her head whenever it got too loud. Mindfulness doesn't have to be a big production. You don't need special apps or a dedicated meditation corner, although those can help if you enjoy them. It's about finding tiny pockets in your day to pause and pay attention. Waiting for the kettle to boil? Take a few deep breaths and notice the steam rising. Walking to the mailbox? Feel the ground under your feet. These small moments add up, and before you know it, they create a buffer between you and the overthinking that used to rule your mind. The beauty of mindfulness is its simplicity. It's not about erasing your thoughts or feelings, but about observing them without getting tangled up. Imagine your thoughts are like clouds in the sky. Mindfulness teaches you to watch them float by without chasing after them. It's freeing, it's grounding, and the best part is that anyone can do it. Even 10 minutes a day can transform how you experience the world, shifting your focus from worry and regret to the beauty of the present moment. As we wrap this up, let me leave you with a little nudge. Overthinking doesn't have to be a lifelong companion. With these mental shifts, you can gradually retrain your brain to let go of those endless loops of worry and regret. And while it might feel overwhelming at first, remember, even small changes can lead to big results. After all, it's never too late to find a little peace in your mind and your life. So what do you say? Ready to give it a try?